Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes a todos. Thank you for joining us today in this Fiesta del Sol Citizenship and Immigration Expo. We have here a couple of lawyers who have some great information and updates on things that affect us in our immigrant communities, focusing on DACA, Know Your Rights, Notary Fraud. So with that, we'll get right to the point. If there are any questions, feel free to go ahead and post those. We should have somebody looking at what questions are coming in. And then we'll finalize this with a little more information on Fiesta del Sol and how to get registered and join us that day. So to start off, we'll go ahead and have Carla Casas, Abogada Carla Casas. If you can please give us an update on where DACA stands right now that it's in the courts and what's been happening lately.
Sure. So I'm going to go back a year just so we kind of can pick up where I guess the last big thing that happened. So last, I think it was July 2021, this was in the Fifth Circuit Court. This was the DACA case where Texas and several other states were arguing that DACA was unlawful, that it is unlawful. So the Fifth Circuit judge last year agreed that DACA was unlawful. However, the individuals that already have DACA can, under his order, can continue to renew their DACA, and advanced parole can also move forward for those who already have DACA, but no new applications are being adjudicated by USCIS. They are able to accept new applications, but not issue new DACA. Now this month, July 6th of this month, the government appealed that decision. So the Biden administration appealed the Fifth Circuit judge's decision holding that DACA is unlawful. And oral arguments were heard just a few days ago on July 6th at the Fifth Circuit again in front of a 3-judge panel. Now we don't have a decision yet, so there's no finality yet there. But reading some articles with regard to the response of the judges, it did seem like the judges were not convinced by the Biden administration's argument that DACA is lawful. And so that kind of gives us an idea of what that decision might look like, but it might be a few months before they actually issue a decision. Whatever the decision is, it's probably going to be appealed again. And the next step would be for it to go to the entire panel of the Fifth Circuit, because right now it was just a 3-judge panel. And then after that would be the Supreme Court. So unfortunately, there's not finality yet. We are still kind of waiting to see what's going to happen. But separately, I wanted to mention that the Department of Homeland Security did propose DACA regulations last September. And it basically would put into rule what we already know as DACA, right? The same, from my understanding, although I haven't seen the final rule, but it's the similar requirements. The person has to have been here since 2007, enter prior to age 16. Those rules, they've been moving kind of slow, but the last I saw was that we expect them to publish the final rule next month, August. So we'll see if that actually happens. And then we'll have to see what happens with that, whether there's going to be lawsuits with regard to that as well. So I guess in summary, right now, there hasn't been any change to DACA yet in terms of the people that already have DACA can continue to renew. They can continue to apply for advanced parole, but new applications are not being adjudicated. So that is still on hold.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you, Carla. And exactly, that's what we wanted. The point we want to make for sure, for anybody who has doubts, please do not stop renewing if you have it. We know where things are right now. We're no new people, right? So those who missed out or who unfortunately couldn't get in on time, they can't do anything about it. But anybody that still has it, I, a dreamer myself, we definitely recommend continue to renew. We don't know what's going to happen. And like Attorney Carla Casas just said, it could still take a few more months, right? I'm also one that always advocates for advanced parole. I did it myself. And right now that I'm going through my green card process, it is making a huge difference because now I have a legal entry. That's what advanced parole gives us. So I know things are a little hard right now, right? And we know with the situation, we don't know what's going to happen. But I would say anybody who has a case, right? Maybe if they are thinking advanced parole, consult somebody, talk to lawyers, talk to people who know. And if this is something that maybe you can do and in the very near future before something else is decided, consider it, right? We've lived in limbo many years and we don't know what's going to happen. But for now, we're trying to take advantage of whatever we can. Thank you so much, Carla, for giving us that information.
course.
And then just to mention, so people can qualify or apply and qualify for advanced parole if it's for business, humanitarian needs, which could mean like if you have somebody, an immediate relative that's very, very sick, very ill. And it's also for educational. That's the reason I went to Mexico for education. So those are the three top ones. And again, we have Carla Casas here. She is an expert. And if there are any questions, right, Abogada, can you tell us a little bit of the cases you've seen around advanced parole?
Yeah. So with regard to advanced parole, absolutely, we're doing a lot of advanced parole cases in my office. And as you mentioned, Lucy, it makes literally like probably a 4-year difference. If you have advanced parole and you're married to a citizen and you're applying for a green card versus if you do not have a legal entry, which is what advanced parole gives you. Right now, the consulates are so backed up. Most of our clients are Mexican, so it would be Ciudad Juarez, and that is the busiest consulate in the world, I think. So right now it's, anyway, it's like a 5-year process basically. But if you get advanced parole and you enter the country, you've been admitted into the country, you can do adjustment of status, which is when you apply here in the US, you don't have to leave the country. And it's about 7, 8, 9 months, at most a year is what we've seen with our adjustment cases. And then I wanted to mention too, under the humanitarian, so as Lucy mentioned, it's going to be either employment reason, school reason, or humanitarian, which can be a family member. And I wanted to mention, it doesn't necessarily require like a serious illness. We've gotten several, in fact, we got one approved recently. A client of ours, his grandfather passed away now almost 2 years ago during COVID. But they weren't able to have like a proper burial. And so they're doing the ceremony now. And his got approved for him to be able to go to attend the ceremony. We've also gotten other ones approved. A lot of our clients have grandparents who are older and they may not have like one serious illness, but they have diabetes and they have like, maybe heart condition, a bunch of different things. And maybe they're just getting older. And so we've been able to get advanced parole approved based on that. So not necessarily something major like cancer, but we include them. We prepare like an affidavit from the client. We'll include pictures showing the relationship. Like, you got to document it well. But we've definitely been able to get advanced parole approved based on just an older grandparent who they may not be able to see if they don't see them in the next few years. So we've definitely had luck with that as well.
That's really, really great information. Thank you, Carla. Thank you so much for that. So again, anybody with questions on that, feel free, do your research. There are resources out there. There are lots of people who know this, as Carla is telling us, they have experience. So definitely reach out. Okay, great. So now we can go ahead and move on to another topic that's just as important for many of our people in our community. We have here Dhenu Maru. She is with an organization that also works in the community. And we will go ahead and touch the topic of know your rights. A very, very important topic, I think, for all of us as immigrants, especially when it comes to a point of entry. We know people are often confused. We may not know the laws. I mean, the laws in this country are, out of this world, right? But she will go ahead and enlighten us a little more about what you can do when it comes to, entering a new country, essentially, and also unemployment, what we can do to care for ourselves, to not let any employer take advantage of us. Even as an immigrant community, we still are humans, right? We still have some rights. So Attorney Dhenu, if you can go ahead and enlighten us.
Okay, thank you, Lucy. And yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad that, Carla and you touched on advanced parole, because, one of the things that in order to get advanced parole, you need to re-enter the United States and you need to be at that port of entry, again, with your DACA documents and your advanced parole documents and all of that. So a lot of times when we hear about know your rights, and I hear some wonderful, wonderful presentations about what to do if ICE comes knocking at your door. So I'm not going to talk about that, because that I feel like there's so many wonderful presentations that cover that very, very well. What I do want to talk about is the limited scope of rights that you have when you're entering the United States at a specific port of entry, right? So when somebody is coming in either with advanced parole, or they're coming in with a visa, or they're coming in with some kind of documents, they're either coming in through an airport or they're coming in through a land border. Those are the two most common ports of entry into the United States. And what people have to know is that your rights are very different when you're entering versus when you're already inside the United States. So when you're already inside the United States, the set of laws that apply to you are the set of laws that govern deportability or removability. Whereas when you're entering the United States, you are seeking admission into the United States. And so there's a whole different set of laws that applies and a different set of rights that apply. And one of the important things to know is that not all of your constitutional rights apply in ports of entries. For example, your right to privacy. It's extremely limited. Your right to an attorney is limited. And so you don't have the right to an attorney when you're entering the United States. You don't really have a lot of right to privacy when you're entering the United States. They can search everything that you have in your possession, including your smartphones, including your laptops, even very highly confidential information that you may possess connected with your employment. For example, one case that comes to mind is that of a NASA employee who was stopped and detained at the port of entry for over 6 hours and basically said, you have to let us make a copy of everything on your laptop or we don't let you in. And so despite him having signed multiple, pledges not to disclose information, he had essentially no choice but to disclose information at the port of entry. And so when we are entering the United States, you have to know what you're carrying with you. If you're entering based on advanced parole, based on, say, a marriage-based adjustment application that you have filed, well, do you have photos of your marriage in your phone? Do they match in terms of the date that you have stated? Do you have photos of your ex that you're going to have to then explain? So you have to know what information you have with you when you're entering the United States, and you can't really stop them, practically speaking, from going through it. So that's one of those things. It's not so much know your rights, but know what rights you do not have, right? But what right do you have? So what happens if you are detained, and what happens if you are, taken into secondary inspection? Then secondary inspection means that you're taken aside, you're asked multiple questions, and oftentimes your statements are recorded either in a transcript format, or there could also be audio video recording. And so what happens when you are entering the United States is that they're often, they may let you in. If they let you in and things are fine, good for you. But they may not let you in. They may just turn you back around. And this is another thing. When you are entering, they don't have to give you the right to defend your case in court. They don't have to give you the access to immigration courts. And so they may just revoke your visa, even if you have a valid visa, or revoke your documents, whatever you possess. And they may just have you go back because they believe that something you possess is contradictory to what you've stated, or they have trapped you in your own words when they're doing their questioning, right? So what can you do if they're sending you back? Not really much to stop them from sending you back, unfortunately. But what you should do, and what I hope everybody, at least if you have one takeaway from this, is that you should always ask for a copy of the transcript. And you should always ask for a copy of any documents you sign. And you actually have the right to do that. And you also have the right to request a supervisor. So when you're entering the United States, if you are being mistreated, or if you're refused a copy of your transcript, you can ask for a supervisor. And you should not walk away from there without a copy of that transcript or a copy of those documents. I can tell you at least 3 instances when we have been able to reverse a expedited removal at the port of entry based on the client having a copy of the transcript that we were then able to review and challenge that decision. So I think that's one of the most important factors you should know when you're entering the United States. Any thoughts or questions on that, Lucy?
Yeah, and just to clarify, so a copy of a transcript is going to be, if you can just specify what that would be exactly?
Sure.
Maybe
So
I missed it.
usually they have you answer, a series of questions, right? Your date of birth, I mean, depending on what your basis of entry is, right? So they will have you answer a series of questions. And then their goal is to, of course, have some proof of your violation. They're trying to kind of trap you in your own words, right? But if you are being truthful, or if you're being very specific and clear with them that, hey, let's take an example. Somebody is entering on a visitor visa and have entered before, and they're being asked, are you entering here to do work or to work somewhere? Where do you work? And they're like, well, I don't work anywhere. Well, what do you do when you're here? Well, I do this and this and this, and I spend time with my family. I don't work anywhere. And they're trying to get you to admit that you've been working, but say you never really did work and you never really admitted it, but they still suspected it. And so they still may revoke your visa and they may send you back, but nowhere in that transcript did you give them an concrete proof or a concrete answer that you've violated your visa, right? So they may send you back, but you may, because you have a transcript, be able to have an attorney review it with you and say, look, nowhere in this transcript do I see evidence of fraud. Do I see evidence of violation of any visa conditions? And then they can take it up with the port of entry. They can take it up with the consulate. Okay. And a real life, very recent example of this was, for me, a client who had worked during his optional practical training OPT period, which is basically like, if you have been a student and you're on a student visa, you get like 1 year of practical training where you're supposed to work. Okay. Now he worked for this company, but that company turned out to be in violation of USCIS rules. So this company was not really there to provide genuine work opportunities. It was a shell company. Okay. And so because the company was being investigated, all of the people associated with the company started being red flagged. And so what happened was this person was able to address this problem at the visa appointment. And he explained to them, look, I didn't knowingly join this company. I joined this company unknowingly, but I realized later on that they were not really doing what they promised they would do. And so by that time, I tried my best to leave, but I left when I found another job. And he was able to explain all of this in detail at the visa office, and he got a valid visa. Okay. And then when he entered the United States, he was stopped again. And he was asked all of these questions again. And at the port of entry, they had decided that he wasn't telling them the truth, and they decided to deport him. In the process called expedited removal. So they took away his visa and they removed him. And so that's when he reached out, and thankfully he had gotten a transcript. And so I was able to review that transcript and see like, hey, everything you stated is consistent with you not knowing that this company was a shell company. And so they really don't have a reason to conclude that you've lied, other than you are associated with this company. And so I challenged it. It was at the LAX airport. I challenged it with the Customs and Border Protections at the LAX. It took like 5 months for me to get a concrete answer from anybody, but eventually we were able to get that removal reversed. And now he's in the process of obtaining another visa, which should be hopefully a straightforward process. So my point being, you don't have the right to bring an attorney there, right, at the port of entry. But the next best thing you can do is get a copy of all of those statements that they made you sign, that you said, that you say, right? Could be that you didn't quite understand, could be a mistranslation, could be a number of factors, but we don't know unless we see that transcript.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much. And I wanted to highlight on that, and I absolutely understand when you're in a point of entry, coming with advanced parole, or like I said, coming, back because you're married and now you're in the status of fixing or adjusting. It's not the time to act like we know it all, right? Because we really don't. We are not, unless you're an attorney yourself. And even then, you're not able to defend yourself at that moment. It's a moment where there's fear. There's so much fear in there because we're at their mercy. And I know, and again, I say it from experience, it's not the time to act, even though we've been, like some of us raised here, it's not the time to pretend that we know what we're doing and we know it all and all this and that. I also wanted to mention, I've learned of cases with relatives who, a cousin who went through advanced parole, and he was only able to get one vaccine, the COVID vaccine. Because COVID times are still here and they're always changing, he was having an issue because he was only able to get one vaccine and didn't have the time to get the second one before he went to go see his mother. Whatever everybody's opinions are around COVID, I just wanted to mention that could also be an issue. And I don't know if you've ever heard of anything like that, but somebody else that I knew also wasn't able to come in on a visitor visa from Mexico because they didn't have a COVID vaccine. Even though the US is not requiring it from citizens to go out and come back with a COVID vaccine, it's requiring it from immigrants. So I want to put it out there, people who are thinking of advanced parole or thinking of getting out, keep that in mind. You might be required to have it as an immigrant because we are seen here as visitors, right?
Yeah, absolutely. We see this across the board where there's a different standard held for immigrants, right? The other topic, Lucy, that I wanted to kind of touch on is your rights as an employee. And this is one area where I feel like, regardless of where you're immigrating from and whether you cross the border with a visa or without a visa, you're going to be wanting to work in most cases. You're going to want to find a way to generate income and to make a living in the United States. And so what we see in many, many unfortunate cases is employers who knowingly accept employees with questionable works eligibility, who then proceed to take advantage of the said employee in various ways. And I have, in the last decade of practicing immigration law, seen everything from employers who have taken away an employee's passport to employers who have, made the employee work an extraordinary, unreasonable number of hours, either at no pay or at no overtime pay. Employers who have threatened outright, overtly or covertly, to ruin the employee's chances. Employers who have threatened to have the employee deported. And literally, the whole gamut, right, of employment abuse. And what I think many people who are at least recent immigrants do not realize is that they do have the power in that circumstance, and that they do have the right to earn the minimum wage. And all of the labor laws apply to them, regardless of their immigration status. And so they can hold an employer accountable for these violations. And if those violations amount to, a form of trafficking, like, taking away their passport or threatening them or threatening their family, then they might even get, a visa from that by reporting the employer. And I know you might have heard about the T visa, right? And so there are options. And I think, one of those things that as an employee you should know is that it does not matter if you are documented or not documented, or if you have, your work permit or not, that your employer still must give you those basic follow those basic labor laws. And then the second thing, for those employees who are here on like an employer-employee visa, and this is something we see a lot, Lucy, in the South Asian community, which is H-1B visa holders. My message to those employees is that, first of all, you have the right to have your LCA. A copy of your LCA should be provided to you. Okay, so an employer and an LCA is a labor conditions application, Lucy, and that actually is where the employer is making all kinds of attestations to the government about what they're going to pay you. This is where you find out what the minimum that they're required to pay you is. So you need to have a copy of that, and you have the right to have a copy of that. The second thing is, and I unfortunately see a lot of attorneys on the employer side who fail to give this copy to the employees. So as an employee, I think you should request a copy from either your employer or the employer's attorney. Another thing which I think is a little bit controversial in this space, just because it's a little less common, but in every other kind of law, you always see each party has a right to representation, right? For some odd reason, which I cannot for the life of me figure out, employer visas do not encourage, and we never talk about employee having a right to representation, which is so weird, because if you think about anything else in the legal world, there's two parties, two attorneys, right? But in the employer-employee visa, I don't understand why the employer's attorney is expected to represent both at all times, and that why we as a bar association are not doing more to let the employee know that, hey, you have the right to representation too. And that this should not be, kind of an unusual scenario. It should be fairly common for an employee to say, okay, here's my lawyer, here's the employer's lawyers. Now you guys figure out what is the best way for me to immigrate, right? But for some reason, because immigrants are not, I think they're not as well versed in the ways of the United States, we just don't see that happening in the immigration world. But the employees absolutely have the right to representation.
That's really, really useful information. That's not something I would know myself. Thank you so much, Dhenu. So I would just recommend anybody who thinks they might have a situation like any that Dhenu just mentioned, where it's involving employment, reach out. The reason we have expositions like the one we're doing now in Fiesta del Sol is for situations like this, right? You get 25 minutes with a lawyer, an attorney, a professional to try to find out, do I have a case or not? So I would definitely recommend it. And Dhenu, I don't know if you speak another language, but we are going to have various attorneys on Fiesta del Sol, I think 2 or 3, maybe even 4 different languages. The help is out there, right? There's different organizations where I'm sure people can go out and ask their questions and try to find out other events like this. There's always free pro bono or pro bono events going on that I'm aware of in a city like Chicago. So thank you again, Dhenu, for all that information. And we'll go ahead and take it back to Carla for a little more information on something that I think is also as important, especially right now. I recently read something, with the situation that happened here in Highland Park with the shooting, and now Latinos being targeted by fraud, by notary, or people who pretend to be notary frauds, and being told, we're from the consulate of Mexico, we're here and we can get you some help because you were a victim. So I'll go ahead and pass it on to Carla. If you can give us a little more information on what notary fraud is and how we can protect ourselves and our community. You're muted, yep.
Unmute.
There you
go. Okay, can you hear me now? Okay. So yeah, with regard to notary fraud, it's a big issue, especially, well, the community I know the most, obviously, is the Latino community. Most of our clients are Hispanic. And I think one of the things that makes it a bigger issue is that in Latin America, and most, I don't know of all, but I think the majority of Latin America, notaries are lawyers. It kind of goes hand in hand, right? When you say when an individual says, I'm a notario, it's assumed that like that means you're, you've got some higher studies, you're an attorney, but that is not the case here in the US. So I think that that makes it easy for these individuals who know that when they say to someone, oh, I'm a notary, I can help you with your immigration paperwork, they think that person is assuming that they're a lawyer, that they have some special knowledge. And here in the US, notaries are not lawyers. And I always like to go through and kind of go, talk about what the requirements are to be a notary. And here in Illinois, the requirements are you have to be at least 18 years old, you've got to be an adult, you've got to be either a US citizen or a legal permanent resident. You have to have been residing in the state of Illinois for at least 30 days. You have to read and write English, and you can't have any felony convictions. That's it. Those are the requirements to become a notary. There is no requirement to even have a high school diploma. You could, not have finished high school, but you could be a notary. And so these are the individuals that are out there, assisting clients with immigration cases. And we see it a lot here in my office because, and the point that I see it is when, the notary has either filed something that they shouldn't have filed with immigration because the person maybe is deportable or has some criminal conviction that's problematic, and they get stuck halfway. Or sometimes the notary doesn't really, they send a packet that's not well documented, that's not well prepared, and it gets rejected. And so we, unfortunately, there's a lot of damage that can be done with notaries because they are not, notaries in Illinois are supposed to be notarizing documents. That's it. And I think it makes it hard because with immigration, there's so much, paperwork. So they're like, oh, we'll help you fill out the paperwork. And we'll, and they're actually not even notarizing those documents. So really it's not even, but it's a very fine line because it's like, they're not supposed to be advising anybody, right, on immigration issues. When you're filling out someone's paperwork, you have to advise them because, first of all, is this even the right form? Should you even be filing this? And that's where they get into trouble because they are not attorneys. They don't have any, specialized knowledge about the laws. And so, it can cause a lot of issues. There is, we've seen there's one notary who's actually been around for a long time. I'm not going to say any names, but this person has been around a long time in Chicago. I know that even some of my colleagues' parents went to this notary to have their paperwork done, back in the 80s. But there was a few years ago, actually, I believe he was somebody ended up being deported as a result of something that he filed. And it was an individual who had a pretty serious criminal conviction. And this notary, obviously didn't let him know this because he doesn't, he's not an attorney, he can't make that analysis. But an individual filed something that then triggered deportation proceedings. And so there have been, complaints filed against this person, but what makes it difficult and another risk of working with a notary, aside from the fact that they're not attorneys, you're really taking a big gamble, a huge risk by working with a notary who's not going to be able to advise you on the immigration aspects of your case. But, if a notary, and I see this happen a lot too, they'll do half the work maybe, and then they disappear. And there's nowhere, they don't have a law license. So you can't file a complaint with like the Illinois bar. It's very hard to get any sort of response from them. What do you do? Go to the police and say, they committed fraud against me. Are they going to do anything? I know with the Illinois Attorney General, there is a department that you can, with regard to fraud, you can file a complaint. I don't know exactly what happens with that though. I haven't followed that through with any clients. So it's very tricky because with a lawyer, for example, we have law licenses. We are subjected to the rules of the bar, Illinois bar, in my case. And, if I do something that a client doesn't feel is ethical, appropriate, they can file a complaint and then I will have to respond. Whereas with notaries, you may not be able to find them again, they disappear. So it's definitely something that, it is concerning. And I think it's important. So many people, I've had so many clients ask me like, oh, well, so what's the difference? Like, why would I go with a notary or an attorney over a notary? Obviously to them, notaries are a lot cheaper, of course, because they're not lawyers. But, so many people don't understand. They figure, well, it's just filling out the paperwork. And so I think that's another big misconception when it comes to immigration law. Filling out the paperwork, I always tell my clients, that's the least of it. Like really I could have a student actually writing it in and then I'm going to review it though. I'm going to do the analysis. I'm going to tell you, what needs to be done, what the route is for you, what the risks are, how to document your packet that we're sending. There's so many parts of it that are beyond just filling out the paperwork. And so I think that's one of the things too that people sometimes seem to miss. And the other thing too, I will say, is that some cases are much more straightforward. And so some of these notaries have been able to get approvals. And so they are able to show, hey, we've gotten so many cases approved. But again, it's a gamble, because the moment something goes wrong, whether even if it's something like USCIS, the agency that we file all these, documents with, sometimes they get it wrong, or they send something back, or, notaries don't know how to deal with that, because again, they're not attorneys. They're not used to like dealing directly with this agency. They kind of stay behind the shadows. They don't sign their name on the documents, right? So they prepared it for somebody, but we don't know who prepared it. Like nobody knows where this is coming from. So yeah, those are definitely some of the issues that we see. And I would say the biggest risk that you're taking is you could end up being deported. We've definitely seen that happen with regard to a notary filing something for a client that should never be filed, because that client might have issues. It's better to stay under the radar possibly for that client. That's the case for some people. And those are all the things that an attorney is going to tell you once they analyze, the facts in your case and advise you. So yeah, that's definitely some of the issues we see.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you. So I guess the takeaway is, yes, they might be able to help you with the documents, but keep in mind, a notary in this state could be anybody. They're not immigration experts.
Right.
If they help somebody, they filled out paperwork correctly and that somebody didn't have a record, that could have gotten them deportable. But if in any immigration case, I mean, having been dealing with immigration for the past 9 years, I'm always super, super cautious. And that's what we want everybody to just keep in mind. Be cautious. And if you're going somewhere and you think it's really cheap, it's cheap for a reason. A notary is not going to know, the immigration laws that an attorney will. So definitely keep cautious.
I would say the most important thing you need is legal analysis of your case, right? You need it, and a notary cannot do that. A notary cannot advise you on how the immigration laws apply to your case. And that's what a client wants to know, needs to know. So they can make an informed decision about, okay, do I go ahead and file for this benefit? What do I need to show? And that's the one thing that they can't provide you. They should not be providing. They do provide advice, but they're not supposed to be, I do want to mention one other thing. I usually, as part of this, obviously know what you're getting into. If you're dealing with a notary, they should just be notarizing documents, not providing you advice. And the second part of that is, how do you confirm that your attorney is actually an attorney? And nowadays life is so much easier because all of the state bars have a website, right, online. And let me back up for a second. Immigration, attorneys who practice immigration law, they don't necessarily have to be licensed in the state that they're practicing in. They have to be licensed in one of the 50 states though. Immigration law is federal, right? So I'm not applying Illinois law ever really in immigration. It's all federal. So that's why I am licensed in Illinois, but even if I'm also licensed in Florida and Georgia. So even if I wasn't licensed in Illinois, as long as I'm licensed in one other state, Florida would work, then I can practice immigration law. So that's one of the things that it's important to know, that, it's okay if they're not licensed in Illinois, but that attorney needs to be licensed in one of the 50 states. So I always tell clients, the first question you should ask is, where are you licensed, right? Once the attorney tells you, if it's Illinois, if it's California, Google, California bar, Illinois bar, you're going to be able to pretty easily nowadays pull up the website, and all of them have a search box or a way to search to confirm that your attorney is actually licensed in that state. And I usually, when I do these presentations, I'll show people what it looks like in Illinois. In Illinois, it's actually iardc.org. That's the website. But even if you Googled Illinois attorneys, it would eventually probably take you to that website. And if you put in my name, for example, it'll show you the year that I was licensed, if I've had any malpractice complaints, or any bar complaints. If I have malpractice insurance, it'll confirm my address. It gives you a good amount of information about that attorney. And so that I always tell clients, that's number one thing. Make sure that this person is actually an attorney, and double check. It's so easy nowadays to be able to go online and do that. And then, or you can also call the bar, depending on where, if you don't have access to internet or something, there's usually a way that you can contact the bar that way. And I think another thing too, with regard to immigration law in particular, is, trying to go with an attorney who specializes in immigration law, because it is such a complex area of the law, and it's constantly changing. And there's so many different sources of law in immigration. It's not just the Immigration Nationality Act, it's regulation, it's policies, it's guidances from the different agencies. It's complex. And so my advice is always go with somebody who really focuses in on immigration. You know, I'm always wary of when you try to do too much, how much of an expert are you really? So that's another piece of advice I usually give clients, you know, try to go with someone who really is in it and is keeping up with the most recent, you know, changes in the law and regulations and policies.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say if they're an expert in something, they should be focused on that one thing. Absolutely. Thank you. And then Dhenu, did you, in your community and the clients that you see, have you noticed, and we'll make this quick, have you noticed notary fraud being a big issue or?
Not versed as notary fraud, because the concept of notary in most South Asian countries is not the same as in Latin American countries. But I do see a lot of perils in terms of unqualified, we call them consultants, who, you know, practice law. And so, you know, most of what Carla says, I think still applies, which is, you know, you have to check for accountability. If someone's not even putting their name on the forms, where is the accountability, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Attorney Casas, Attorney Maru. We'll go ahead and start wrapping it up here. So as a reminder and information for everybody watching, we invite you all. Fiesta del Sol is happening July 28th, so Thursday through the 31st. On Saturday is when we will be having 20 plus attorneys, both virtually and live, hosting this exposition with us, and again, offering some of these consultations, 25-minute free consultations. Anybody who's interested, please go ahead and register to fiestadelsol.org, so www.fiestadelsol.org. And we will be at Benito Juarez High School. That is 1450 West Cermak Road. And again,